To understand the various ways that medical science can assist reproduction, it is important to understand how the reproductive system functions in both sexes, because the cause of infertility often lies equally with both men and women. The main players in the female reproductive cycle are the pituitary gland, the ovaries, and the uterus. Their activities are closely coordinated. Each month, one or other ovary releases a single egg, an event known as ovulation. It is brought about by a series of complex interactions between the pituitary gland, the ovaries, and the uterus. The pituitary gland is itself under the control of this small area of the brain known as the hypothalamus. A new menstrual cycle begins when the nerve cells of this center secrete a hormone called gonadotrophin-releasing hormone, GnRH, into the network of blood vessels which surrounds the pituitary gland. Stimulated by pulses of gonadotrophin-releasing hormone, cells in the pituitary gland secrete another hormone, follicle-stimulating hormone, or FSH.
And what does FSH do? Stimulate follicle. What does that mean? Anybody remember?
FSH travels in the bloodstream, reaching the ovaries. There it stimulates the formation and growth of an ovarian follicle in one or other ovary. The follicle consists of an egg, a number of surrounding cells which secrete estrogen hormones, and fluid.
Estrogen they call, but they just said what the two functions of the follicle. It starts to grow the egg inside, you see it inside there, and right here. And the follicle cells start to secrete estrogen or estrogen in there. But estrogen, and what does estrogen do?
Stimulate the growth of the uterine wall?
Yep. So the beginning of the growth of the uterine wall or endometrium.
FSH helps the egg to mature and prepares it for release. As the follicle matures, the hypothalamus increases secretion of GnRH. This in turn stimulates the pituitary to secrete a second hormone which acts on the ovary. This is luteinizing hormone, or...
What does LH do? That big spike in LH, a surge in the amount of LH in the bloodstream? Exactly.
LH.
It'll tell you.
Toward the middle of the cycle, there is a sudden peak in the blood level of LH. This acts as the trigger for ovulation. Within minutes of its release, the egg is guided by suction through the fringed opening of the outer end of the fallopian tube, starting it on a journey which will take 5 or 6 days as it passes down the tube and finally reaches the cavity of the uterus. Meanwhile, after the follicle ruptures, it is converted into this yellowish body known as the corpus luteum. Cells of the corpus luteum secrete the hormone progesterone, which brings about important changes in the lining of the uterus, preparing it for possible pregnancy. In fact, the lining of the uterus, known as the endometrium, undergoes changes in response to hormone levels during the cycle. In the first half of the cycle, known as the follicular phase, the developing follicle secretes increasing amounts of estrogen hormone, which encourages regeneration of the endometrium. After ovulation, there are important changes in the endometrium, aimed at making it suitable to receive a fertilized egg. These changes are brought about by a secretion of progesterone from the corpus luteum. The secretion of progesterone is maintained for several days, but if the egg is not fertilized in that time, the corpus luteum withers, and falling levels of progesterone and estrogen trigger the shedding of the uterine lining as the menstrual flow. The cycle then starts again. But if the egg is fertilized, no menstruation occurs, as the corpus luteum continues to function, secreting progesterone during the first 3 months of the pregnancy. Thereafter, numerous changes occur to support the developing embryo.
Men are simple-minded men. You got one slide. That's it. Do you need the lights up a little more or no? You're good? Okay, so for the men, it starts the same exact way with the same exact hormones. The hypothalamus secretes GnRH, which triggers the release of FSH and LH. Yes, men have FSH, follicle-stimulating hormone. They don't have eggs, but what do they have? What's the male equivalent of an egg? Sperm. You guys are very quiet today. Sperm. So FSH will help to produce sperm. LH is different in males. It's also known as ICSH. I just call it LH. And the LH for men, they actually trigger the production of testosterone and other male sex hormones. So that's where it's different. For females, it triggers ovulation, where in males, the LH will trigger the production of testosterone and other male hormones. One thing I don't have on the slide, and I want to make sure that you write down on the slide, is that the combination of FSH and testosterone produce sperm. Did everyone hear that? The combination of FSH and testosterone together, those two together, will produce sperm. So it's not just FSH alone, it has to be FSH and testosterone. So testosterone has two functions. One, to help produce sperm with FSH, and two, it's the secondary sex characteristics. That goes into our next bullet point. So for men, secondary sex characteristics are done by the testosterone. And think about going through puberty, the voice lowers, they get more musculature and hair on the genital areas and facial areas. And for females, it's the estrogen that's responsible for secondary sex characteristics, and for females, hair on the legs, I forgot the armpits for both, and hair on the genital area. Then you have the increased development of breast tissue, and I think that's all. Chris, did you have a question? No. And you learn more about that, I think, in health, so I'm not going to go into a whole lot more details about that. But you can tell that testosterone has two functions, and estrogen has two functions. Estrogen, one function is the beginning of the thickening of the lining and secondary sex characteristics. Any questions on reproductive cycle before we move on to internal or types of fertilization and development? Now, I know this was part of activity 2. I want to make sure that you have the correct answers, and so we're going to go through this rather quickly because you've done it in activity 2. Two different types of fertilization and development, but there's 3 ways that they can be combined. Internal fertilization and internal development. Internal fertilization and external development. And then external fertilization and external development. I had a student that asked, is there ever a time where it's external fertilization and internal development? And the answer is, in nature, no. However, if a human needs that reproductive assistance, it does occur. So IVF, in vitro fertilization, is where they extract the egg and they will fertilize the egg outside in a laboratory with the sperm. And then once that embryo develops, at about day 5 or day 6, they will transfer that embryo back into the female. So technically that's external fertilization and internal development, but it is not a natural, it will not occur in nature. It has to be assisted in a lab. So we're going to talk mainly, you're not going to be quizzed on that, but just I wanted to, I thought that was a good question, and so I wanted to bring it up in here as well. So internal fertilization and internal development, it's exactly how it sounds. The union or the fertilization of the egg occurs inside the female's body. And the development also occurs inside the female's body. Advantage of this, there's 2 main advantages to this. One, it's an easy maze for the sperm. There's only two options. You go to the right fallopian tube or the left fallopian tube, and typically half go to each, and it's a direct target of the egg. And second advantage is that the mother is protecting the developing fetus. So there is protection for that developing organism. Most mammals do this. Humans, lions, tigers, bears, oh my. Dogs. Marsupials do not. And platypuses do not. Platypi or platypuses are both the correct way of saying it plural. Just to let you know. Internal fertilization and external development. Once again, fertilization is occurring inside. But the eggs are external. Developing those fertilized eggs develop external from the female and hatch outside. So again, it has the same advantage for the internal fertilization. There's a nice pathway, easy for the sperm. But for the for the development, there's no protection from the parents. Yes, they sit on the egg, but when they need to go get food or they ever leave, it is open for predators to come and get the fertilized egg. All birds, some snakes, lizards, and turtles. Just so that you know, the eggs that you purchase from the store have never been fertilized and will never be fertilized. A hen house, the reason why it's called a hen house is because there are no roosters around there at all. And so what happens, if you think about it in human terms, every month a female releases an egg, right? Same thing for hens. They release eggs daily.
It's a period?
And it's not a period. It's just the egg coming out of the hen. It has not been fertilized at all. There is no rooster around. It's just a natural process of the hen. Lastly, external fertilization and external development. It's the release of both the male and female near one another. It has to be in water. Think about in the internal that it has to be in a liquidy solution so the sperm can swim and survive. And then external development, the egg, the fertilized egg will develop, embryo will develop outside of any parental care. And disadvantages to this is that you have to produce a ton of eggs and a ton of sperm because think about caviar. We eat the eggs, and so they haven't been able to be fertilized. So you're just throwing a bunch of eggs and sperm out in this area hoping they find each other. So you got to throw out a lot of eggs, millions of eggs, and millions of sperm so that they can find each other. Second, there's no protection at all. Think about Finding Nemo. Sad the predator came and ate all the embryos and only Nemo was left. And so there is no protection. Most fish and amphibians, frogs, they do external.